Welcome to the NonProfit Voice, a podcast series brought to you by NonProfit Pro, the go-to resource for nonprofit management and strategy. In each episode, we're going to sit down with leaders of nonprofit organizations, the people responsible for paving the way for our sector, along with key technology strategy partners who are transforming our industry. Here at the NonProfit Voice, we'll have refreshing conversations in which we will all learn more about the convergence of nonprofit and technology. Be sure to follow us on social media and visit our website to find more episodes of the NonProfit Voice. And you can download all of the NonProfit Voice episodes on iTunes, Google Play, or Spotify. We will have all the links down below. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the NonProfit Voice, a podcast series hosted by me, Nhu Te, Editor-in-Chief of NonProfit Pro. I'm really glad to have you guys back and really happy to be back on the line. I hope everybody is having a fantastic November. I can't believe that the year is almost over and we're going to be entering year 2020. I know it's a busy time for nonprofits, given that Giving Tuesday is literally around the corner and year end is finally picking up. And for a lot of nonprofits, this is the busiest time of the year. So I'm wishing you the best of luck in whatever campaign, initiative, or events you're doing. So aside from it being one of the most busiest times of the year for nonprofits, how are you guys doing? Let me know in the comments what's on your mind. What are you struggling with? What kind of content should we bring you in 2020? At NonProfit Pro, we just concluded our annual peer-to-peer conference, Peer-to-Peer Advanced, in which we partnered with Turnkey. I'm sure you know them. They're huge in the peer-to-peer space. And we kind of sculpted and constructed this beautiful conference that happened in Philadelphia. And it was a really good time. I'm still kind of getting off that high and relaxing and trying to catch up with everything. And with it being the holidays, I'm just in a really, really good mood. It's my favorite time of the year. The weather is great, mostly aside from it being like 20 degrees already. I just love the feeling that this time of the year gives me. I'm always so happy. I want to be with friends. I want to be with family. I'm always really appreciative of everything I have during this time, at least more so than I am from the rest of the year. And I just love the warm and cozy feelings that this time of the year gives me. What can I say? So how do you guys feel about the holidays? Tell me what you're grateful for. I would love to know. So let's get into the topic of today's conversation. I'm really excited to talk about it. In episode number 6, we're going to dive into board development. We're getting into why board strategy is so crucial, and we'll also chat about the role of technology too. But before we get into it, I want to introduce my esteemed guest for today's episode. Joining us today on the NonProfit Voice is Kate Cochran, CEO of Upaya Social Ventures, and Jeb Banner, CEO of Boardable. Hey, you two, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. How are you both doing?
Excellent.
Doing well, thank you.
Awesome. So before we dive into today's conversation, I wanted to take a few minutes to learn a little more about the both of you. So Kate, can you share your background in the philanthropic sector with us?
Sure, happy to. I've actually spent most of my career in the philanthropic sector, which is nearly 30 years now. I've worked with very large nonprofit organizations like Stanford University, but also spent a fair amount of time with small startups. I actually have an MBA in nonprofit management, and I'm currently CEO of an 8-year-old organization that invests in companies that create jobs for the extreme poor.
Very cool. And Jeb, how about you?
My background is a little different. I come from an entrepreneurial background, and I've run a number of businesses. The business before Boardable, the company I'm running now, worked primarily with larger nonprofits here in central Indiana, doing a lot of website, branding, marketing work. And during that time, I had the opportunity to start 2 nonprofits here in Indianapolis, a co-working nonprofit for entrepreneurs, and then a nonprofit that serves independent musicians. So those 2 nonprofits, I was able to be the chair of those organizations, and that informed a lot of what became the product of Boardable as we move forward with that product.
Awesome. It seems like you guys both have very extensive experience in kind of different ways. So I think it's going to be a great show. So let's get into it. Kate, I want you to lead this question here. Why is it important for nonprofits to consider the health of their board of directors?
Yeah, I think that, when nonprofit boards are working really well, they truly amplify the work of the organization. There's a bare minimum that a nonprofit board is required to make sure that the organization is actually having, a positive effect on the issue that it was founded to work on. But it can do much more than that. They can bring in resources, they can help staff see around corners, they can provide coaching and mentoring to staff, in case there are competencies that the organization needs that the staff doesn't have. And, they open up doors and, can help influence policies. So all of these things can be incredibly valuable, but the only way you can unleash all of these positive effects is when a board truly understands its role and the role of the organization. And that takes work on both sides to make sure the board is properly briefed and knowledgeable.
I think that's a great overview, Kate, of how to look at board health and particularly the role it plays in the organization. I have the opportunity to serve on United Way board here in Indianapolis, and it's not uncommon for us to encounter one of the agencies in a situation where the board was not doing their job, and the agency is now in trouble financially or in terms of succession. So often, I think good intended volunteers sign up for board service but don't know what's expected of them, don't really know what it means to be on the board. There's a lack of onboarding that often happens at many nonprofits. There's a lack of clarity around roles and responsibilities. And so they get into this and then they don't really know what their job is. And there's a lot of pieces to that. And we look at that, across a number of different areas in terms of how we look at our product, but they're not showing up, they're not prepared, they're not following through, they're not fundraising. And that all speaks to engagement, and that then declines the overall health of the board. And that leads to some real problems where the service being provided is then being disrupted because the board wasn't doing its job. So it's really critical that the board is healthy for the nonprofit to be healthy.
Great. Yeah. Jeb, you talked a lot about, the challenges of the board of directors and how they're not doing their job. What we see at NonProfit Pro is a lot of nonprofits struggle with not only developing their board of directors, but managing them once they're in those seats, because they haven't clearly defined what their roles and responsibilities are. And a lot of board members are just sitting idly, just waiting for tasks or responsibilities. And so we want to try to help nonprofits understand how to better manage their board of directors. So my next question is, what are some best practices to develop and manage a strong board of directors?
Sure, happy to. And I can already see that there's a theme that is coming through here, which is really just about clear expectations and not being afraid to outline those very explicitly. It seems to me that the biggest problems with boards of directors, come from just an unclear definition of what it is the board is supposed to be doing. And honestly, as a sector, I don't think we've done a great job in answering that. So sometimes you have boards who are, too deferential to staff, and they're afraid to ask the hard questions, which means they're not doing their job, which is looking out for the health of the organization. And then, of course, on the other hand, sometimes you have boards who don't understand that it's actually staff who's tasked with executing the programs and running the organization, and that their on the ground visibility is really, really important. So for me, the most important things that I've seen about developing and managing a strong board of directors are one, you start with a very clear job description of what the organization expects from its board, so there's no confusion after somebody joins the board. And the job description is going to change a bit depending on the stage of organization. I think we're all familiar with this evolution from kind of a worker board in the early days, where there might be a need for board members to take on some operational responsibilities, to an evolution to a pure governance board when an organization is much larger, more sophisticated, and their board is asked to oversee strategy and look at the results of the organization, but they aren't going to get involved in operational things. The second thing that I think is really, really helpful when the board is, you described sort of sitting on the side waiting to figure out what it is that they're supposed to be doing. I always think that if a board is given a clear set of goals each year or multi-year goals in a strategic plan, one of the most important things that they do is making sure that the organization is on track to meet those goals. And that sort of gives a framework for those conversations. Part of that is also making sure that the executive is the right executive or is performing the way they need to. The one thing that a board of directors does that nobody else is able to do is supervise the performance of the executive director. And in fact, in my own board, I'm recruiting, I tell people that every single board member we have is so knowledgeable and has such great experience that if they were to fire me tomorrow, I would trust them. I would say, well, gosh, you know so much. I really trust that you probably just made the right decision. And then finally, my last recommendation is for staffs at NonProfit to realize that board members join boards with their own agendas, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it's important to understand, what is it you're looking to get out of this experience? We think a lot about the value that board members bring to organizations, but often those individuals are looking for professional development. They might be looking to learn about a part of their community that they don't know about. Ask them about that, and then structure board meetings in a way that satisfies those needs, or structure other events so that the board members are feeling fulfilled by the experience.
Kate, I really love how you broke that into 3 really clear and concise steps. And while, there's a lot to be filled between the lines, this is a good stepping stone, at least for those who are listening in, to take back to their organization and implement. So before we move on, I want to kind of circle it back to Jeb to see if you have anything to add to what Kate has said.
I think Kate did an excellent job of really laying out a philosophy of guiding principles really there on how to build an engaged board. My only addition would be that underlying all of that, and I'm sure she knows this as well, are a lot of hard conversations. It can be hard conversations where there's that staff member sitting down with the board member and saying, hey, you're not holding your weight, you're not carrying your weight, you're not doing the job that we discussed on the way in. The board member having that conversation with the executive director around accountability. And I think one of the things that's really challenging about nonprofit organizations and boards in particular is that people don't always feel safe to speak up. They don't always feel like there's that layer of trust there where they can say something and be vulnerable. They tend to kind of go with a consensus mindset. And too often, I think people sit on their hands and they don't step forward and say something they should say. So I think engendering that environment of safety for the board is very critical from the leadership, the executive director, along with the staff. And so that has to happen internally within the organization, but also then be mirrored within the board culture as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's something that can be done or kind of outlined in the beginning of board recruitment. But before we kind of move on to the next question I have here, Kate, I'm curious, when you're out there recruiting board members, what does that onboarding look like? And do you guys have a protocol for board orientation?
Yeah, we do actually. And there are a couple of things that we've put in place. One is we try to bring new board members on in a cohort. So instead of sort of one at a time as we meet people, we think of our recruiting sort of season as we get to know people in the first half of the year. We vote on them in our July board meeting and bring on sort of a new class of board members in our September meeting. We meet every other month. And the reason we do that is we think it is valuable for board members to be new with someone else. They may be very accomplished in their professional career and in their lives, but everybody experiences a new responsibility with a little bit of uncertainty about, hey, how does this work? So we bring together a class. This year, we've added 4 board members, and there's also a practical component. By bringing them together as a class, it means that they get to go through orientation together. And what that means is that sounds a little bit more formal and big of a process than it is. It's a Zoom call where we have our board happens to be scattered around the world. But we come together for a 1 to 2 hour call. There's obviously organizational information to share, but it's also about forming the social ties among this cohort, getting their questions, asking them what they are hoping to get out of board service. And we do that, probably 2 to 3 weeks before the first meeting that they join, so that they can join the first meeting feeling like a fully integrated board member and, with both feet.
Very cool. Yeah, like you said, it seems a little formal, but I kind of like it because it makes it more serious for board members, and then they will be taken more seriously. And then it outlines all the expectations and the roles and responsibilities from the get-go, so they know how to move forward. So kudos on that. I love that.
Thank you.
So, moving on to the next question, Jeb, I would love your expertise on this because you're probably the whiz. So, what role does technology play in board management? And what should nonprofits consider when they are starting to look for a platform?
Technology needs to scale with the organization and board as they grow. When I started the couple community nonprofits here in town, before we built Boardable, of course, we were just using email, Dropbox, Doodle, calendaring. I call that digital duct tape. It's a very good early stage solution to get everybody on the same page, at least to some degree. It does create a mess later on when you can't find things. I remember one time trying to find our bylaws, and I knew it was in my inbox somewhere, for instance. But early on, you should go with something free to cheap, and just something that works with the way that your board works. You're probably more in a working board mode. It's like a startup. You do what you got to do to get through. I think that when you start to more formalize a nonprofit, you have a full-time executive director, you maybe have a staff member or two, and you're looking to professionalize the board experience. And I think that's a really key phase, is when you're moving from that DIY to more professional experience. You're being more intentional about onboarding, you're being more intentional about roles, succession planning, etc. That's a good point to bring technology in. And there's a lot of solutions out there that you can look at. Obviously, I'm biased. We've built one that specifically is built for nonprofits, to help nonprofits professionalize that board experience and to do it in a way that's cost effective and easy to use. But I think that's a good tipping point. Now, as you get larger and larger, you want to make sure that solution scales with you. And so there may be a point where you're looking for things that a more entry-level solution might not. meets your needs. There's really expensive solutions out there that we've, obviously our competitors like Diligent or even Board Effect, that are in the, tens of thousands a year for larger organizations. But most nonprofits, in my experience, don't need that robust of a toolkit. They need something that can centralize for meetings, agendas, documents, minutes, voting, discussions, and make sure that there's an archive going forward and the ability to go back and look through that for anything that happened in the board. And part of the value of that is when you onboard new board members, they can get up to speed very quickly. I remember just forwarding emails to new board members of just, oh, here's this email and this email, here's these attachments. And it really was not a very professional experience for that board member, which made them feel differently about the experience joining the board. And then the other side of that gets into productivity and overall engagement. If you're spending a lot of time digging through your inbox and kind of just in the weeds and mess of the board experience, you're doing less time doing the thing that you really should be doing, is using your time and your talent, and of course your treasure, to push that organization forward.
Yeah, I think without doing it all manually, that can be very frustrating, but also very time consuming, energy consuming, and it just takes up a lot of mental capacity because you are placing things in different folders and organizing in a way that probably doesn't make sense. But having one place to keep all those files, I think, is really beneficial for nonprofits to invest in. So Kate, I'm curious, how has investing in a board management platform benefited your organization?
So I have to be honest and say that we're still in that like free to cheat strategy, and now I'm really interested in learning more, because I do think that and we share information via email, and sometimes via links to Box, which is our file management system. But I think one just reality is, I know that my board members, as great as they are and as much as they do their homework, they think about us once every 2 months when board meetings come up. And so if they had easy access to all of the information that is related to the topics that we're debating and such, instead of having to go through their email, if they could review things from a meeting 6 months ago easily, I think that they would be much, I love the way Jeb put it. It takes that energy and puts it toward moving the organization forward, and not just to the administration of getting through all the documents.
Yeah. And so with that said, Jeb, I would love your insight on this. What are some challenges that our sector currently faces when it comes to board development and management? And how do you see us solving these challenges in the future?
Yeah, we see it in 3 buckets, if you will. We see the logistical administrative side of it, which is that management piece of just centralizing everybody, making sure they have that one single point of reference. That creates a lot of efficiencies. It reduces frustration. And as Kate nicely put it, is that it gives that board member one resource. They don't have to go digging through things to find, or prepare or go back in time to a previous meeting. To us, that's really foundational. That's logistical. That's administrative. That's efficiency. But the second piece of that's more the engagement piece. That gets into the board member experience, and of course, these build on each other. And so, looking at the board member experience, how can you engender the right behaviors for that board member? And we look at eight areas of behavior for engagement. How can we make sure they're prepared for meetings? How can we nudge them to read those materials? How can we make sure they're showing up, that they're following through, that they're participating, that they're volunteering if that's relevant, they're advocating, they're donating, they're fundraising. So that's that engagement piece where you've now like kind of begun to measure more their individual contribution and how that comes into the whole. And a third area of the challenge that we see speaks to board talent. We've seen this with a lot of our customers. They really struggle with finding qualified board members to serve on their boards, specifically of diverse background. Too often in many communities, it's a very small population of people serving routinely on numerous boards, and they're overtaxed and they aren't able to really do their jobs. They cannot effectively serve on 5 to 6 boards. But that's often the case in many communities. We feel like there's an opportunity to create a marketplace for individuals to come in and raise their hand for board service. And we plan to build that into the product in time as we go forward. But there's a real problem here. And the solution is also going to open doors, we hope, for individuals that don't have access to these networks that are so powerful in career changes and moving up different social economic ladders. So those are the 3 things that we think about a lot: management, engagement, and talent. And of course, there's lots around that, but those are the big buckets.
Love it. You did a great job outlining all of that for us and talking about the challenges and some of the solutions that can be done in the future. Kate, do you have anything to add?
Not a lot. I think that really did say it. When I think about the challenges that I experience as an executive in the sector, it really is about engaging the right board members with the right kind of information so that they are prepared to help the organization at the right level. And having tools to do that would be extremely valuable. And it would also, I think, bring some more people into the sector. Sometimes I hear from potential board members that, if their time is really limited, they want to make sure that they're providing pro bono assistance, in sort of the highest leverage way. And I think that we as a sector need to find better ways to engage those kinds of people. So I really liked the way Jeb described it.
Yeah, me too. All right, so before I let you guys both go, I have one more question for you that we like to ask at the end of each episode. If you had one piece of advice for nonprofits, what would it be?
It kind of goes back to an answer that I gave earlier. I think that the most important thing that nonprofits can do is have a really clear understanding of what is the problem they're trying to solve and what is one key North Star metric that helps tell them whether they're making progress on that. In our case, it is about job creation. And once we clarified that and everybody started talking about the number of dignified jobs our organizations have created, all the other decision making gets easier.
Yeah, that's great. I completely agree with that clarifying metric, Kate. I think my advice to nonprofits in general is to think and act more like a business. My advice to businesses in general is to think and act more like nonprofits. And what I mean by that is that, just as Kate mentioned, you need to be metric driven. You need to understand what your economic engine is. You need to make sure you're producing results. You have shareholders in the sense of you have people you're serving, your board that you need to make sure, maybe you call them stakeholders in the nonprofit world, in the for-profit world, they're shareholders. So there's a lot of things I think nonprofits can do to be healthier by applying different business strategies and tactics and treating their organization more like a business, because it truly is a business. It's got differences, obviously. And I think that businesses need to be more purpose driven. They need to be more mission driven. Mm-hmm. They need to know why they're in business. They need to be able to speak to that why better. So I think that both sectors have a lot to learn from each other. And I think there's an opportunity, and I think B Corps are a step towards that, to more of a shared approach to serving people, customers, whatever you want to call them, using different tools, whether it's business or 501c3 status.
Right. Yeah, I think that's great advice. At NonProfit Pro, I've written a lot about, looking at your nonprofit like a business, because there's a lot to be learned from the for-profit sector and applying some of those strategies and tactics into your nonprofit strategy, because then you have kind of an outline for how to move forward and what goals you want to hit and how you're going to hit them. And I think a lot of times nonprofits don't necessarily get too detailed with that, and I really think they should. So I agree with you right there. And Kate, you talked about having clarity for nonprofits, and I think that couldn't be any more true. Generally speaking, when it comes to looking at a nonprofit's messaging and communications, it gets a little fuzzy on what they're trying to get done. So to do it in the most clear and concise way that you possibly can, saying like, hey, this is the problem we're trying to solve and here's what we need from you, I think is kind of the best way to go.
Absolutely.
So that about wraps it up for today's episode. I want to thank our listeners for listening on today's podcast. And Kate and Jeb, again, it's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate you guys for joining me on today's Nonprofit Voice podcast episode and sharing your insights and expertise on board development.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And so on behalf of NonProfit Pro, we will see you on the next episode of the Nonprofit Voice. Have a great day.